Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our next webinar in partnership with Merck Sharp and Dumb. My name is Dwayne Schultes, and I'm the Managing Director of Vital Transformation. Today's webinar is called What Can Europe Learn from Germany's National Decade Against Cancer? While Europe is working on creating its cancer plan, many member states already have national cancer programs in place. For example, Germany is 1 year into its decade against cancer. German institutes for research in healthcare, the private sector, political institutions, and civil society are joining forces to improve cancer research, prevention, and treatment. Germany aims to cure or control cancer long-term in 75% of its patients by 2030, obviously a very ambitious goal. What can the European Commission learn from Germany in drafting their cancer plan? And what are the success factors for a government-driven multi-stakeholder plan to improve cancer care? So to discuss these topics today and others, I'm joined by an exceptionally strong panel. I'd like to introduce to you first Professor Dr. Carsten Buchmeier, the Director of the University Cancer Center Hamburg. Professor Dr. Buchmeier, thank you for your time.
Great to be here.
Also, Antonella Cardone, the Director of the European Cancer Patient Coalition. Good morning, Antonella. How are you?
Good morning, everyone.
Also from the German Cancer Plan, Professor Dr. Olaf Ottmann, President of the German Cancer Society. Dr. Ottmann, thank you very much for your time, sir.
Thank you.
And finally, Deepak Karna, the Regional President for Oncology for Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Canada of Merck Sharp and Dumb. Deepak, always a pleasure, sir. How are you?
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
So to begin, we would like Dr. Ottmann to give us an overview of why Germany is approaching this National Decade of Cancer. Dr. Ottmann, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, cancer is considered a major health burden in Germany. Therefore, in 2008, the German Ministry of Health, together with the German Cancer Aid, the German Cancer Society, and the Association of the Clinical Cancer Registry, decided to set up a national cancer control plan. They implemented fields of action to improve cancer care. The most important are early detection, implementing screening programs. Second, establishment of standardized structures for cancer care and quality control. Third, cancer medical treatment. And last but not least, the patient participation. This strategy was highly successful. Many goals have been reached since then. For example, after establishing a breast cancer screening program, now in 2019, a colorectal cancer screening program was established. In 2020, a cervical cancer screening program followed. Concerning the establishment of standardized structures, we succeeded in establishing more than 1,300 cancer centers. These are organ-specific cancer centers or broader cancer centers, certified by the German Cancer Society. This is the biggest and best implemented program for cancer care in Europe. This initiative is linked to the initiative of comprehensive cancer centers by the German Cancer Aid, and we have a common contract, which is the National Certification Program. Furthermore, the German Guideline Program in Oncology was established and covers 90% of the topics related to cancer diagnosis, treatment, aftercare. About 30 guidelines were implemented. Then, 2013, the Clinical Cancer Registration Law was set. Obviously, cancer registration, epidemiologic and clinical, was established in Germany, but now cancer registration became mandatory. And this allows us to control quality and evaluation of treatment outcomes. This means, in summary, that we established all components of the quality cycle in oncology, guidelines, which are the basis for action in certified cancer centers, the certified cancer centers, which are quality controlled by external reviews, and cancer registration, which can be used to control the quality and outcome. So then in 2019, it was considered that cancer is one of the major challenges for modern medicine. The Federal Ministry of Education and Research has joined forces with the Federal Ministry of Health, and many partners, such as the German Cancer Aid and the German Cancer Societies, more or less all stakeholders which are involved in cancer care, diagnosis, and treatment. And they decided to make a targeted fight against cancer a success. The mission is to strengthen cancer research in the areas of prevention, early detection, diagnosis, and innovative treatments. People should benefit faster from the results of research, and experience and insights gained in oncological care have to be made available for research to further improve cancer care. In the joint declaration of the National Decade Against Cancer, objectives and aims are formulated. The most important ones are cancer research should lead to cure or control cancer in the long term in 3 out of 4 patients. Cancer prevention has to reduce today's rate of around 40 of preventable cancers by 10% per decade. And access to high quality oncological care and innovations in research has to be provided for all people in Germany. Collaboration between institutions is necessary to achieve this goal. And one important point is we have to strengthen public awareness for this problem. There are several fields of action in the decade. These lead from expanding cancer research, for example, by new national cancer treatment centers, by improved funding of cancer research, over making active use of progress in cancer research to verifying effectiveness. All of these fields shall ensure that goals can be achieved. The Strategy Committee of the Decade Against Cancer has decided to set up 3 working groups. These are unresolved questions in cancer research, second, cancer prevention, and third, generate knowledge by networking cancer research with cancer care. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Altman. We'll now pass over to Professor Buchmeier to discuss how we implement that in the working groups. Dr. Buchmeier, the floor is yours, sir.
Oh, thank you very much. So good morning also from my side. And let me just take over at those 3 working groups that were established about a year ago. And the first one you heard is really tackling with important questions in cancer research. And the idea is here to identify those research questions that are really of importance in improving care, and then define the national potential approach on the national research expertise. So what can we solve in Germany, specifically with the specific instruments that we have here in terms of researchers, in terms of infrastructure, and so on. So that work has started about a year ago. The second part is the prevention part. And also that is building on recent data, really showing that if we implement everything in prevention that's possible today, and also in early screening, we can reduce cancer incidences by 40%. And that's absolutely necessary, looking at the numbers of cancer patients that are evolving in Germany, now increasing from around 500,000 newly diagnosed patients to 600,000 in about 10 years. And the third, and that group I'm going to talk about a little bit longer, is the one that I'm working in together with Professor Ortmann. It's a group that brings together the knowledge from actually clinical research to the routine care. And so we try to translate innovative strategies into clinical care, but also derive research questions from clinical care data back to the bench side, and then ask and try to answer those questions there. If I can have the next slide, please. This working group 3 that we're working on, is really tackling a number of interesting aspects. Of course, some early translations. So how can it go from bench to innovative trials, and where are the structures that we can do these trials in? But particularly looking at late translation. So how do these innovative treatment results from clinical trials come into real routine care? And how can we do these trials today by making them faster in terms of using biomarkers at endpoints, and also more patient-relevant outcome parameters, such as patient-reported outcomes that are now much more important endpoints in these newer kind of trials. And that needs a structure that brings together the treatment of patients in certified specialized areas, such as the network of oncology centers of excellence in Germany and the certified oncology community centers and networks that are actually certified by the German Cancer Society. And the idea is to improve the interaction, the data exchange between all these areas of treatment. So the academic centers, the oncology centers of excellence, the community-based qualified centers, and also the outpatient care providers, and learn from all those data and bring up new strategies. And so this will start, for example, with some of the innovative national strategies that are already ongoing for years, such as the network of hereditary cancer, such as the BRCA network, for example, or another ongoing network, the National Network of Genomic Medicine in Lung Cancer, which is a network that brings together the genomic analysis data in lung cancer patients throughout many centers and try to identify which helps best to which patient, but also using routine documentation systems such as from the German Cancer Society. So this can be some other aspects like the Onco Research Box, for example, that helps to generate ideas from actually data that are already there. And that will also integrate care and research data from psychosocial measures, from palliative care, so not only from innovative treatments alone. Finally, if this is going to work as a whole strategy, there needs to be funding. And the idea, of course, of the National Decade is to fund many of these aspects in terms of innovative cancer research, such as the things that are done in Group 1, by funding new structures for translational research, such as new National Cancer Center Partner Network with up to 6 centers in Germany. But also there has been a funding call already for practice-changing clinical trials that was issued by the ministry. And again, there's a National Institute of Cancer Prevention in planning that will also try to focus on these things. In our specific working group that I've just talked about, there will be strategies, possibly funding for outcomes research, for better patient participation, data analysis, cohort studies, and more to come. That's actually on the way now, and I think it will be very, very interesting to see how this can really help and work throughout the next 2 or 3 years while this comes into full place.
Well, Dr. Bruckmann and Dr. Ottmeyer, thank you very much for your input. That was fantastic. I appreciate that. It's ambitious, and it certainly can help. Antonella, from your perspective, Germany aims, obviously, to control cancer in 75% of patients by 2030. What are the challenges that you see currently faced by your members in ECPC, and how can this help?
Thank you, Dwayne, and good morning again to everyone. I would like to quickly comment on the German Decade Against Cancer. Of course, I notice the similarities with EU Cancer Mission and Europe's Beating Cancer Plan. So I do hope that we can soon consider the German Decade Against Cancer as a best practice from which to learn and exploit good practices at EU and member state level. I must say that I am particularly impressed with the high relevance given in the strategy to citizens and patients. Throughout the strategy, there are several signs that let me hope that this is not just a declaration of intent. The strategy also foresees some interim evaluations. So I am really looking forward to seeing how the work progresses and possibly exploit the good practices at EU level and in other member states. So I'll be watching you now. I mean, I was not aware of the decade, but I will definitely hope that we will stay in touch. Now, specifically on survivorship, I must say that for too long, we have been focusing on treating people with cancer to make sure that they survive cancer. Considering that now, due to the improvements in research, prevention, and treatment, the number of cancer patients surviving cancer is increasing and will continue to increase. It is a time to increase the attention given to patients' long-term well-being and their ability to return to a productive and good life. So the main challenges cancer survivors face are related to the ability to return to a normal life. But what is normal life? So first of all, for cancer patients, going back to normal life doesn't mean to go back to the life before cancer, because that will never happen. So they go back to a new normal life or an adjusted normal life, which is a decent overall quality of life. Normally, it is associated with the return to a productive life and the return to work. In order to go back to this normal life, cancer survivors have to face an overall rehabilitation, which is not just a physical rehabilitation, which is still very important. But also we have to consider psychological, cognitive, social, sexual, nutritional, and financial rehabilitation. So what do we do at ECPC to support cancer survivors? Well, we advocate for them at policy level to make sure that comprehensive survivorship care is high on the political agenda. And currently that is both within the cancer plan, EU cancer plan and EU cancer mission. We have established a cancer-related complications and comorbidities initiative, which involves 19 different organizations representing different comorbidities, going from cardiovascular conditions and cancer-associated thrombosis to nutrition, including obesity and celiac-related issues, from neurological to pain issues. We are also implementing a new project that is led by Dr. Françoise Monnier on the financial toxicity. And we aim at mapping the right to be forgotten policies across Europe. And this is the right that cancer patients have to access insurance or a mortgage. And the project builds on the experience of the right to be forgotten laws in France, Belgium, and Luxembourg. So to conclude, we are also involved in several EU-funded projects. Those are large EU projects where survivorship has a key focus. Some of these are the EPAC, Joint Action, or Qualitop Life Champs. And those are projects that use artificial intelligence to improve cancer survivors' care. And our role on these projects is to make sure that the patient voice is heard.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Antonella. Picking up on something you said here, sort of this in the post-COVID-19 era, I'd like to go back to Dr. Ortmann and Dr. Bruckmeier. If we're looking at some of the budgetary impacts that are going to be happening, or some of the things that have happened post-COVID-19 and some of this planning, has the German National Decade at all been impacted budgetarily, or at least in planning, because of COVID-19? Is there anything that's been done in reflection of the pandemic? Dr. Ortmann, from you first, is there any change, or is it still just status quo?
No, obviously there has to be some changes. Up now in 2020, from March 2020, there were no personal meetings. We had some telephone conferences, but obviously the work is a bit hindered by that condition, because personal meetings are important. The work is going on, but it's going on a slower level.
Sure.
Thereby, which is a part of it from the National Decade of Cancer, together with the German Cancer Aid and Professor Baumann, who's the moderator of the whole decade, and myself for the German Cancer Society. We had an initiative to monitor the development of clinical care, cancer care, of early detection, and also cancer research during this period. And there were obviously, in some points, there were drawbacks. For example, in cancer research, for clinical studies, there were relatively severe cutbacks, and also in some areas of early detection. In cancer care, not so much. I think the main parts of cancer care were held up quite well because we have a very good established and a very federal system which covers regional cancer care as well as high level cancer care very good in several institutions, as I told you in my introduction.
Thank you. And
but
Dr.
We hope we are in discussion constantly, but we hope that during this year, this will recover again and we come back to personal meetings, which we see is still important, although we have the possibilities of webinars, video conferences, and so on. But this sometimes is not the true touch that you need to make some decisions and projects.
Yeah, there are challenges to webinars. That's true, Dr. Ortmann. Thank you. Dr. Bruckmeier, you're hands-on in the lab at Hamburg. How has this impacted your work at the university?
Oh, well, COVID has impacted our work extremely in terms of all the measures that we've taken to really increase safety for patients, but also treating cancer patients with COVID at the same time. We had a number of patients with leukemia who were COVID positive and had COVID disease and really needed a very intensive treatment and very difficult. It has impacted our clinical research side quite extensively since a lot of the studies had to be stopped due to problems in monitoring. New studies could not be initiated over some time, and that is slowly picking up again. But clearly that has impacted at least, or will have an impact on the whole year, but at least it will bring down figures for half a year, definitely. And also implementing all those measures in the wet labs where people have to work together and hand over materials and so on. So it's also not easy. And then cancer research had been slowed for some time, and it's maybe picked up to 80% of what it was before now. So I think it has a tremendous impact. And of course, as Professor Ortmann already said, the work in the total networking across Germany for the National Decade has been slow because of no personal meetings that were possible there. And in terms of budgeting for the National Decade, I think that's an open question at this time point. So I think you can look at it in two ways. You can say, well, now Corona has caused so many problems, and it will be so expensive, so maybe there will be less money for the National Decade in the next years. On the other hand, you can also say if we are able to generate 130 billion or something like that just for a program to help with Corona, so it shouldn't impact the amount of money that's actually given for the biggest health problem now for cancer. It should actually be easier to even raise more money for that and tackle that problem as well. So that's, I think, the political message we have to talk about.
And you seem to be an optimist, Dr. Bruckmeier. Thank you.
No, but I'm not giving up yet.
So Deepak, you've heard what's happened in Germany. Obviously, there's been a huge impact from COVID-19, and Germany obviously handled it one of the best in Europe. From your perspective on the economic challenges of COVID-19, are you at all concerned about the impact on budgets, not just in Germany, but broadly across Europe as we're drafting the European Cancer Plan on developing innovative treatments? I mean, for example, combo therapies, CAR-Ts, these were already under enormous pressure before the pandemic. How do you see it as your role of developing these treatments?
Thanks, Dwayne. And I do agree with Dr. Ortmann and Dr. Bruckmeier that there needs to be some optimism in what we have seen through COVID-19. It does, first and foremost, when you look at how countries were able to manage the pandemic, it shows the importance of a well-functioning healthcare system to be able to really support society. So all it does is reinforce adequate healthcare investment levels in the future so that we can better manage these pandemics. So I think there's this heightened need of making sure we have the right investments in healthcare overall. And then my hope is that we don't lose the momentum that we have achieved in fighting cancer over the past many years, right? When I listened to Dr. Cardone talk about survivorship, if you look at skin cancer, look at melanoma, 10 years ago, 5 out of 100 patients would be alive 5 years after diagnosis. And now 1 out of every 2 patients is alive. So there's just this increasing need for us to support survivorship, but we've made such great progress. So I would not want to see that progress stifled because of what we've had to do with the pandemic. And I think that's what Dr. Buchmeyer was saying as well with his optimism. You know, one of the statistics that people hear all the time is that cancer spending, it's been stable, about 4 to 7% of total healthcare expenditure is on cancer since 1995. But when you look at the great work we've done in terms of cancer incidence, in terms of the amount of people being treated and the improvements there, we would think that you'd want to invest more in cancer as opposed to having this flat expenditure over 20 years. So first and foremost, I hope that we don't lose the momentum. Your other question, Dwayne, in terms of combinations, you know, that's a different challenge in itself. When you think about monotherapies, it's so much easier to evaluate the monotherapy in terms of efficacy. When you look at guidances that come across different countries and how they want to deal with combinations, for me, it should still come down to what is the value of that combination? How much does it do versus the current standard of care? And how do we continue to assess that? But the challenges come in more if you've got a combination that has 2 different products from 2 different companies. How do you work logistically with 2 different companies, with a payer, with a government? How do you do that with European pricing laws, et cetera? So there's a lot of work that we need to do to enable this to be able to happen. I also think that what we need to continue to focus on is the value, the benefit versus current standard of care. The other encouraging thing that I really liked about the working group that Dr. Buchmeyer talked about is I believe that having this integrated team working together could help us improve access even further by looking at those areas that are delayed versus today. So a lot out there, threw a lot of information out there, Dwayne, but this is an important topic for me, so thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And again, I'd like to remind the audience, we are taking your questions. They're coming in slowly. We do have a few questions already. We'll try to get to them. Please press the Q&A bar on your toolbar, and we will answer the questions as they come in. Antonella, I'd like to come back to you now from the patient perspective. Obviously, COVID-19, we've heard that, you know, even in Germany, has done very well under COVID-19 and managed the pandemic quite well. There's been an enormous impact, a slowdown of 80, well, they're almost up to 80%, but there was a radical slowdown in clinical research, certainly. Are you concerned from ECPC about the impact of the pandemic, and how do you think we need to move forward?
Well, of course, at ECPC, we are concerned, but we are optimistic as everyone else here on this panel is. Because I want to start with saying that COVID-19 has shown with no doubt that health threats can have a devastating impact not only on our health, but also on our economies. So, I mean, the example of the pandemic is evident. And the current crisis is clearly demonstrating that population health and economic growth are interdependent. So strengthening healthcare systems will be crucial in the wake of the COVID-19 crisis, and it will be even more fundamental to avoid the waste in the delivery of care. And to this extent, it's worth to mention that ECPC is a member of ALLCAN, which is a global multi-stakeholder organization involving cancer patients, policymakers, healthcare professionals, researchers, and industry, including MSD. Our host is a member of ALLCAN, and we work together to find pragmatic solutions to waste in cancer care. So ALLCAN can provide support in making healthcare systems and cancer care more sustainable and resilient by improving the efficiency of cancer care in the COVID-19 aftermath. At ECPC, we are also now in the process of mapping how member states have reacted to cancer patients during the pandemic. And we hope to have soon a clearer picture from which we can draw more specific recommendations. So we have just launched a survey for cancer patients in Europe. And in any case, to conclude, I believe that the funds to health should be increased. So and we should follow the good example of the European Commission, which has increased to 9.4 billion the proposed health budget. And as health and the economic growth mutually reinforce each other, it is crucial that the health ministers and the economic ministers work together in the negotiation and implementation of the recovery plan. This is fundamental to us.
Thank you, Antonella. So we just asked that. Thank you. Looking at Germany's Decade Against Cancer comprehensively.
Sorry, Dwayne, can I just...
Sure, please, Deepak.
Just wanted to add to what Dr. Cardone just said. You know, as a member of AllCam, MSD does believe in that the only way to really improve patient outcome is the result of collaboration. And one of the things that I really like about AllCan and the approach is to really map out the entire patient journey. So what can we do in each element of that patient journey to improve ultimate access and care? And that requires collaboration across all the different aspects. So whether you look at the regulatory piece, or you look at the payer piece, or you look at the healthcare provider piece from diagnosis to treatment, working collectively to really address the entire journey is going to be important. And I think having, that's a lot of what I believe the Europe Beating Cancer Plan and Germany's Decade Against Cancer Plan want to be able to do, is how do we improve from the moment of diagnosis to that treatment and that entire cascade. So it's good to see that all coming together.
And again, I think that's a great point. Picking up on that is that one of the key points that we're going to need, or one of the key tools we're going to need, is access to data in order to be able to measure and track that. And given that most data systems are currently siloed within institutions, there will need to be some fundamental changes. I guess from the standpoint of the German National Decade, what is the position of both the working groups and as well as the project on data sharing, both within industry as well as within sharing, just to get better results? Professor Ortmann, I'll start with you. Are there any fundamental changes, or is there any focus on trying to use health data in a more integrated fashion under the cancer plan?
Yes, this is actually one of the main subjects. On the one hand, in the strategic committee, on the other hand, also in the working group 3 that Professor Bokemeyer presented. Obviously, there are many different sources of data and data bases that are available for certain projects, and they have very different intentions. So what we have to do is to find out how to manage these best and how to get important interactions between these. And I think this is one subject which is addressed in the Decade Against Cancer in a very good way, because all the key players interact. And this is not the traditional way. There is, for example, the basic cancer researcher who does preclinical lab work, for example, and they produce data, and then the data production is ready. This is very important work, and it is finished by the publication of the data. And when people interact and they see that they are one part of the developmental change, they see their importance, but not their isolated situation and just the production, what they think is the focus. But the goal is to improve cancer research and cancer care as a whole. So from my point of view, the way how to use data depends a lot on what do you want to achieve. Let me say, for example, today there's internationally a big wave doing real-world data research. Yeah, I would say so far, and I'm very much interested in this kind of research. Most of the data that we have in clinical or whatever data banks are not useful for any research because they are completely unstructured. We learn now that we have to structure these data and collect these data with certain intention, because we want to really use them to learn something out of routine care, for example. In cancer research, in clinical cancer research, the situation is a bit difficult because you have a clear purpose. You want to test the hypothesis, you set up a clinical trial, and you have a result. Yeah, and well, our task at the moment in the decade is to combine these two, because when you have shown this, for example, as I told you in a clinical trial, you want to see, does that work in routine care? We have some possibilities to test if this is really working at the moment, but it's underdeveloped. Yeah, we really have to better develop this system. This is what we call if you want the traditional way of translation, translation of research into care. Yeah, but what we want to do in future, we know that we cannot test everything in clinical trials. We also want to generate knowledge in care. And if we want to do this in a very reliable way, we have to set up our data banks, and we are on the way to do this. Yes, there is some initiative, but we really have to test these possibilities, and we have to ask questions that can be answered by these data banks, and we will see how reliable they will work. I think this is one of the most important tasks for the decade, and I have never experienced that how many people from different worlds of the oncology network, if you want, come together, discuss, and learn from each other, because sometimes they live, I would say, a bit on different planets. But now we're coming together, and this is, I think, one of the major advances in the decade against cancer. We had very good achievements in the National Cancer Control Plan, but the National Cancer Control Plan is more in the way of cancer care. And we set up now a system which provides very homogeneous structures for cancer care. And this also is a sort of a good basis to learn from experiences in cancer care, or to perform studies in cancer care, for example, patient-reported outcomes and all these things.
That's great. Thank you, Dr. Ortmann. Dr. Bookmeyer, please go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, just taking up on that, I think when we're tackling with these questions in the working groups, I think it always comes down to three major points. First of all, there is a large number of data available from research, from clinical trials, but also from routine care. The data are there, so why don't we use them better? And number one is there should be more similarity in documentation systems, so nobody wants to redocument 3 times the same data for different systems in different ways. So this kind of interchangeability of data documentation is one of the first things that's absolutely necessary, and that's tackled in the working groups. The second, of course, is the exchange of data from different institutions or different societies to each other. So that's the IT questions behind it. So how can that be safely done and smoothly done without too much problems? I think that is very solvable now these days. And the third, and that is actually the most difficult question currently, is when patient data are involved there, the data protection laws in Germany, which are federal laws. So there's a kind of different data protection systems in each of the member states of the parts of Germany. And so you have to really make sure that you're protecting patient data on the one hand, but again, to exchange all these data on the other hand, so that everybody can learn from that and do that in a safe manner, and trying to harmonize these data protection aspects and how to get agreement by patients to use their data for that. I think that's the biggest challenge, and that needs to be solved rapidly now to really improve in that question of data usage.
Do you see post-COVID, is there more openness to data sharing from the public, or is it still, particularly when the industry is involved, do you still see some pushback there? Is it opening up or not?
Well, it's hard to say how much COVID has really impacted, because it's still there and it's not completely over, and things are changing rapidly fast. I think let's see how, I mean, there's so many COVID associated discussions. How many people would take a vaccination against COVID? And I'm surprised to find out maybe it's only 70% of the population. I can't believe it. So, and then there's other questions. How many people will be using an app now? And let's see how many people really use that or are afraid of misuse of their data. So I'm not so sure how that solves out in the end. But generally in cancer, we clearly have the feeling that patients are very willing to provide their data, including their genomic data, their biomarker data, to be part of a large data pool for further analysis, as long as we can kind of guarantee that it's not their name that goes throughout everywhere there and being spread out all over the Republic.
Thank you. Antonella, have you seen a change in your members post-COVID about the willingness to share data? Is it changing? Are attitudes changing?
Well, I don't know if it is due to COVID-19, but in general, patients and the citizens are not so much afraid to share their data as far as they maintain control and they know what the data are used for. So I think that it's really a balance between the use that can be done by normally researchers or industry and the protection of the patients when it comes to, for instance, access, work, or insurance. I mean, those are really the big challenges related to data. It's not that in principle citizens or cancer patients don't want to share their data. It's about the use and how to demonstrate that they maintain control. Because I mean, if we look at the use of our data through social media or just the internet, when we go on Google, they know everything about us. Who is protecting us from this? And so that is, so I think that we have to make sure that there is a good level of protection as far as it doesn't have a negative impact on research, because of course we all benefit from the development of research and from finding new solutions for our health issues, also beyond cancer. So I think that is the main.
I think Dwayne, beyond the patient challenges that Dr. Buchmeyer and Dr. Cardone just talked about, the first two challenges that Dr. Buchmeyer described are really important. You know, when a couple of years ago at the European Trade Association, we initiated a health data mapping project to look at the visibility of current and future health data available. And the project found a couple of things. One, that the availability and the quality of health data varies across European countries. So it's very difficult to be able to aggregate it. And secondly, that data sources across Europe, including academic registries or EHRs and networks, they remain fragmented. So they're mainly standalone solutions. So much like Dr. Buchmeyer said, it's very hard to be able to look at this more broadly because there are such variabilities in the type of data we collect, the infrastructure that exists across individual countries in Europe, and to be able to aggregate it. So there's a lot of work that still needs to be done to be able to have the system to be able to look at data in the appropriate way.
So
Dr. Buchmeyer, would you agree with that?
Dr. Buchmeyer, do you agree?
Yes, absolutely. I think these are enormous tasks, but also big chances. I mean, there are so many data, and I think we have to tell the patients, Google knows more about your health than does your physician and your health insurance together.
and probably Netflix. I mean, so I think we all agree if Germany's done a very good job, or at least is working to, you know, make data sharing, or at least data platforms, part and an integral part of the cancer plan. So it seems, do we all agree that the European Commission in drafting their plan, they also needs to think this? I'm seeing some head shaking here. Yes. Okay, that's great. I think that's good, and that's a good takeaway. Thank you very much. One of the challenges we're also seeing related to oncology and cancer treatments are obviously stratified personalized medicine. They obviously can reduce long-term costs on the value chain, but that requires valuing the product over the whole life cycle. The problem is this is not always done, and we're seeing a lot of unequal access to treatments across the EU. What can be done to fix these problems of unequal access across the member states? Let me begin. I'll begin with you, Deepak, this time. Well, what do you think about this access issue where we're not seeing, even though the European Charter provides equal access to treatment for all accordingly, we're not actually seeing that with a lot of treatments? What do we need to do?
Yeah, so I've always felt that a cancer plan needs to balance three objectives ultimately, right? One is fostering innovation, equal and timely access, and then the sustainability of our healthcare systems. And what is really concerning to me is when you take a look at the difference in access across EU member states, it varies so much between how early patients can have access in Germany, which has a very sophisticated healthcare system to be able to evaluate innovation. But then you have other member states where it could take 13 months, it could take 2 years to have access. So I think we need to spend a lot of time, as I said earlier, sharing best practices. What is it that works in a country that enables us to address the innovation, see that it's actually appropriate innovation versus current standards of care, and then get it through the system so that it is available to patients? And why does that take so long in other countries? There are obviously a lot of different issues in each country, including affordability, including how the HTA system is set up, including how that access is evaluated, including the ability to have data, et cetera, et cetera. But there are incremental steps that I believe we need to take by sharing best practices to improve that.
Thank you, Deepak. And Antonella, again, I come to you. What about the problem of unequal access from a patient perspective?
Well, if so, the solution to all these problems, I mean, if I could dream, would be a European health system, a unified European health system. That would be the solution to unequal access to treatments. Of course, this is far away to happen. So in the real world, what can be done to reduce inequalities? I'd start with optimizing existing tools, such as the Cross-Border Health Directive, ERNs, Center of Excellence. But then on the other side, also it is important, as mentioned before, to find ways to, I'd say, homogenize HTA, so the health technology assessment, or at least share best practices and learn from what is happening in Germany. I believe is one of the most advanced countries when it comes to allowing a treatment on the market as soon as possible. And then, of course, one point about the HTA process is involving patients so that they can advocate for themselves and make sure that a treatment is available as soon as possible. And as things are now, I mean, currently in Europe, the disparities in accessing a treatment are huge. And I must say they're really unbearable. It's crazy. Like in some countries, like Germany, a treatment is available on day one, and in other countries they have to wait 7 years, and those are not necessarily Eastern European countries. There could be Denmark is one of these countries, or then they have to wait maybe 12 years in accessing the same treatment that was available on day one in Germany, in Romania, for instance.
Yeah, we've seen 500 days in France for access to several therapies recently. Yes, this is a problem.
That's one of the bigger issues, right? Is this discrepancy across Europe and when you get access to innovation. You've seen the great work done in Germany, but again, 2 out of 10 medicines, EMA-approved medicines, are available in Poland 3 or 4 years later. So what is it that's different? There are many elements, but I think we need to tackle that. The one other thing that's not directly related to improving access, but it's important to, I believe, all of us, is health literacy, right? Another thing that can improve ultimately patients getting access to innovation is what do we do to ensure that cancer literacy is improved. And this low health literacy can help us in many ways as patients better understand their healthcare system, how they can access information. What does a biomarker test mean? Why are they being asked to do this? I think there is a huge opportunity for everyone across the continuum to really work on this, because this does give us an opportunity to improve how patients can access health ultimately, but also for them to understand where they can get access to health. Dr. Bookmeyer.
Yeah, Brookmeyer wants to jump in. Yes, please, Dr. Brookmeyer.
I was just wondering, I mean, there is clearly discrepancy in access to innovative therapies throughout Europe, but it's actually not only in innovative therapies. I mean, even those essential cancer drugs are not as available in some countries compared to other countries. So it's actually a broader problem. And that may also be the same aspect in terms of screening and so on. So I think now when Europe takes up with the Europe Beating Cancer Plan, takes up this idea of improving cancer care in Europe much further, one needs to analyze which things are those that really make the biggest impact if we try to harmonize them throughout Europe. And it may be that this will not be the analysis of even 50 more genes to find a very unusual mutation for a rare treatment. It may also be that in some other parts it may be structural elements that affect many patients and can save many lives in the end. And I think that needs to be an assessment, which are the best measures and how can they be tangled with the brightest, with the largest impact for the population throughout Europe.
Thank you. Again, we've been having a very vibrant conversation, but we do have a few questions from the audience. I'd like to get a couple of them in now if we can. This is from someone who wants to be, I guess, somewhat anonymous, an RB. Thank you, RB, for sending through your question. Could the speakers comment more on the plans around prevention in the German National Cancer Plan? You mentioned plans for the National Institute of Cancer Prevention. What does this look like? So what tangibly under the German National Cancer Decade Plan are you doing around prevention? Dr. Ortmann, Dr. Brookmeyer, I don't care, either of you who wants to chime in. Dr. Ortmann, I'll go to you.
I may comment. So what the Brookmeyer mentioned is that there will be a new research center for cancer prevention, which is set up in the vicinity of the German Cancer Research Center in Heidelberg. There, a more focused, more structured cancer prevention research will be set up with a focus of a clinical benefit, if you want. On the other hand, in primary and secondary prevention, there have been some initiatives in the past, and what has been discussed by the group of 1 to 3 working groups is what will be the next projects. And one of the next projects will be bowel cancer in younger people, which will be set up, and there will be following others. But in secondary prevention, we are, I told you that we already set up the screening programs, and further screening programs will follow. And we have also to measure effectiveness of these screening programs. And I think this is one very important point, not only to find out where are new aspects for prevention, for example, vaccination, but how are they working? And as you might be aware of, for example, vaccination against cervical cancer was developed many years ago, but the implementation and the use in Germany has been very low and is still not optimal compared to other nations. That means it's not just the success of research, which is important, but also the implementation process is important.
Yeah, obviously.
And if I tell you the numbers of the, for example, breast cancer screening program in Germany, the numbers are even dropping. Of the people that are the women that participate. So one of the goals is to establish or to prevent more cancer, to get a better efficiency in secondary prevention. But what we absolutely need, we need more awareness. Yeah? And so one of the main goals of the Decade Against Cancer is to increase public awareness for this subject. We now have public awareness for COVID-19, yeah, but we do not, possibly many people do not know that every day 700 people in Germany die from cancer. Yeah, this would be a message which many people would not believe possibly. Yes, and every day 1,400 people are newly diagnosed with cancer. And if they would see the numbers, how many cases are preventable or can be cured due to early detection, then this is a very important part, and this will be also a very important part of the cancer research in the decade and cancer prevention programs that are developed in the decade. Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Bruckmeier, quickly, anything from your
Well,
side?
there isn't much to add. In a nutshell, I think it's in two directions. One is understanding the psychological barriers and motivation and implementing all that's there for prevention on a broad scale. And the second is actually also to start to tangle with new innovative research in prevention, maybe easy biomarkers for the risk of cancer or kind of blood tests that show you there is cancer emerging and so on. So also new ways of prevention / early detection.
Great, thank you. We just have a couple minutes left, everybody. Again, it's a fascinating conversation. I'm sure we would all enjoy. I'd love to talk for hours on this topic, and often do. Unfortunately, we do have other things to do, so I have to cut it short. I do have a final question for the panel, and if you could all just be very, very crisp and short in your answers. The Decade Against Cancer is many steps and objectives, obviously, and seems quite successful in Germany. It's done a very good job. If you could choose one deliverable that's been a matter of success in Germany, but should not only be in Germany, but should be a recommendation for the European Cancer Plan. If there's one thing you could recommend for the European Beating Cancer Plan that they should absolutely incorporate, what should it be? I'll start with you, Dr. Ortmann. What do you think is the most important thing from the European perspective?
From my perspective is that the interaction between all partners that are involved in care is one of the most important things when you set up a cancer plan. Think the whole way from early detection to treatment, to documentation of what you're doing. You have to keep this in mind, and because people working in this whole field are very different, and what is really dangerous if they just work in their surrounding and do not think about the whole problem.
Thank you. Deepak, from your perspective, what would you like to see carried over from the German Cancer Plan to the European Plan?
I think Germany is exemplary in making sure that cancer patients have timely access to innovation. So what I'd like to be able to make sure we address is to ensure equal and timely patient access, and to be able to tackle inequalities. And in order to do that, you're going to need to look at our pricing and reimbursement system, how we do HTA evaluation, how we're able to improve that, to be able to ensure that we have equal access. And the last thing I'll say very quickly is this requires everybody. I've always said that to make meaningful change, you need a multi-stakeholder platform that includes payers, includes governments, includes industry, includes patients, includes healthcare providers, and everyone sitting at that table together to make that meaningful reform. Thank you, Dwayne.
Thank you, Deepak. Dr. Bruckmeier, from your perspective, what would you like to see carried over? What do you think's been the most impactful?
Well, the thing is that I'm actually an oncologist and I'm treating cancer patients, but still seeing the incidence of cancer rising throughout Europe over the last years with an older and growing population. I think we need to focus on prevention. We need to get the numbers of patients developing cancer down. And that's so taking those prevention aspects really further in Europe is extremely important. And then on the other hand, tackle with a large number of cancer survivors and getting them back into normal life, into working process and so on. So I think these are the two major aspects that are actually not treatment. And also I'm standing for treatment in my daily life, but I think these are impacting things.
Well, you're talking about large investments in screening and genetic testing and things that will require investments. Absolutely.
Yeah, but even using the things that are there and making people aware of all the possibilities and prevention. And even, I mean, we know that, just to say one example, 20% of all cancers are clearly related to smoking. So if we can solve this problem somewhat better, it will be a large number of patients that will never be patients. Thank
you. Antonella, from your perspective.
Well, there are several deliverables that are good, but one thing, one specifically struck me, and that is making active use of progress in cancer research. So what is the purpose of having found a treatment and not making it available to all cancer patients? And I would also like to add that you shouldn't, so the cutting edge researches should not be accessible, the results, only to cancer patients in Germany, but across Europe.
Thank you, Antonella. Briefly, just to remind everyone, we will have a next webinar on July 8th looking at head and neck cancer. This is our early bird debate series. It's a half-hour, short, intense discussion around a specific issue. You can register at vitaltransformation.com. And again, really fascinating session, everybody. Dr. Ortman, Deepak, Dr. Bookmeyer, and Antonella, thank you all very much. And for our audience, those of you who came with us, thank you very much. And I call this webinar closed. Thank you, everybody.